Hello everybody, good morning. Greg here from Flowering Spikes Records, and today I'm going to do a video. I've been thinking about doing this one for a long time. I'm going to talk about my 10 favorite records from the label Nonesuch. Nonesuch was started in 1964 by Jack Holzman, the president of Arista Records, and it started out as a budget classical label. I'm not going to talk about any of the classical records. I don't think most of them are very good. I think most of them were licensed from European recordings, and they didn't really record anything new themselves until the late 60s, or maybe 67, 68, something like that. Teresa Stern, who was the president of Nonesuch Records, she contracted Morton Subotnick and some other electronic musicians and modern composers to write and record new material for the label. And this is basically the period that I'm going to talk about. A couple records will come from a little bit more modern era, but most of it through the 70s and early 80s. And to me, Nonesuch breaks down into really three categories. You have the avant-garde composition, you have the field recordings done by David Lewiston all around the world. He traveled to the Middle East, the Far East, Africa. There's tons of African recordings. There's Japanese gagaku music, Indian classical, Romanian dance music, just everything you could imagine. Incredible field recordings, really pioneered the concept of going out and doing that. And then also film soundtracks. So I'm going to show 10 records, basically 3 from each category. I could make 10 from each category easily. I could do 10 soundtracks, 10 field recordings, 10 avant-garde records. And I would also like to mention, just as far as the production and the sound quality from Nonesuch, in this period, the field recordings and the avant-garde composition albums were all mastered and lacquers cut at Sterling Sound by Robert Ludwig. Most of them have really incredible sound. Like, there's a few duds here and there, but especially the electronic works and the modern chamber works have just stunning sound, better than the bigger labels sometimes for that kind of chamber music. All right, so that's enough of my 6th grade book report on the history of Nonesuch Records. If you want to learn more about it, you can research it yourself. I'm going to start with this album right here, Ioannis Xenakis with electroacoustic music. Ioannis Xenakis, one of my favorite composers, traditional, classical, romantic, modern, whatever. I think Ioannis Xenakis is just such a genius. And this album consists of tracks that were originally recorded between 1957 and 1962 in Paris. And this is all tape music. This is all musique concrète. So it doesn't have any of the bombastic percussion and metal and grinding rusty sheets of aluminum and all of that stuff that Xenakis would do later on. Doesn't have any strings in it or anything like that. I mean, it does have those elements in it, but they're all recorded and then chopped up and slowed down and sped up. And really what it is side 1 is really like the prototype, maybe first drone piece ever. It's just a long, stretched out, slowed down, very harmonically rich and interesting and timbrally interesting, but it is long. There's not very much rhythm. But nonetheless, in my opinion, one of the 10 greatest, most groundbreaking Nonesuch records. This is actually a compilation of those earlier tracks that were recorded, I believe, for Erato. And this came out in 1970. And if you're into early experimental electronic music, this is like the foundation of so many things that are going to come in the future. Okay, next up, this is Morton Subotnick's The Wild Bull from 1968. The first Morton Subotnick album to be released on Nonesuch was his record Silver Apples of the Moon, which I also love very much. But to me, this one is a more mature and contemplative work. I think Silver Apples was really more of an exploration in the possibilities of the Buchla 100, which Don Buchla actually built for Morton Subotnick. And while it's typically more how a Buchla would sound, erratic and blippy and bloopy and all of that stuff, this work is almost more orchestrated, and it's in two distinct sections, a section 1 and a section 2. Morton Subotnick is just so extremely important in the history of electronic music. To this day, I have a Buchla system in my studio, and I compose a lot of music on a Buchla. But you know, the amount of brilliance that Morton Subotnick was able to coax out of the original Buchla 100 is just mind-blowing. So this album is really somber in its mood in a way, and it's kind of like a modern electronic requiem. And it was based on an ancient Sumerian poem called The Wild Bull That Was Laying Down. And this poem is said to be a lament on the fleeting mortality of life itself. And that's really the mood that this piece has. So the first movement is really closer to Silver Apples in its erratic and explosive and propulsive, and there are a lot of glissandi and things going up and going down. It's very rhythmically propulsive, and for anyone who owns a Buchla or is recorded on a Buchla or whatever, you will know that the sequencers are 5-step sequencers instead of your usual 4, 8, 16. So right there, anything made with the Buchla sort of has a really interesting rhythmic thing going on because everything's in 5. And it just throws it off and gives it a little bit more of a spacey open feel than just sort of the metronomic 4/4 all the time. And part 2 is really the conclusion and the come down from part 1. Each part's about 12 minutes long, 10, 12 minutes. And this one is more spiritual in nature and contemplative. It's really transcendent, but there's also an undercurrent of something really menacing about it. And so if you're interested in the early works of the Buchla 100 synthesizer or Morton Subotnick's early works, this album is just absolutely stunning. This next album is one of the David Lewiston recordings from the Explorer series. And this is Ram Narayan with Master of the Surangi. And if you don't know, the Surangi is an Indian classical instrument, folk instrument, and it's 3 strings and it's played with a bow, and it's attached down at the bottom to like a goat skin head. So it's almost like a bowed banjo. And instead of playing it with your fingers on any sort of fret or anything like that, it's played with the fingernail. There's a lot of sliding, and that's how you can really get those microtonal raga notes out of it, and sort of bends in and out of tonality is with the fingernail. It's almost like playing slide, and this guy is just an absolute master. I love his playing so much. This is such a deeply spiritual and meditative record. Sometimes just in any other music, you know, some of the ragas are very uplifting and early morning ragas or early evening ragas, and this is like a dusk raga, and it's slow and it's melancholy. And side 1 is really just one raga, and the notes of the raga are very interesting. So right in the center you have like a big augmented 4th, bookended by 2 half steps and a minor 3rd at the end. And it just makes for such an interesting sort of mysterious, sad, but yet somewhat stately sort of modality. It's just a very long, solemn, introspective raga, really beautiful playing. Highly recommend this record. So this next record is another one from the Explorer series, and this one is called Tibetan Buddhism, and this is recorded at the Kyoto Tantric College by David Lewiston. And this record just creates the most beautiful atmosphere. It's just such beautiful singing, throat singing. Again, there's sort of microtonality in there as well. There's really not much I can speak about the technique or the musicality of what they are actually singing. I just know that I love this record, and it just creates like such a beautiful vibe in the room when you're playing it. And it reminds me a lot of this record right here. This one is the Kyoto Monks Tibetan Tantric Choir. This is recorded by Wyndham Hill. This is just like a 10 out of 10 stunning audiophile recording. This will blow your mind. This one is more of a field recording. It's more a little bit at a distance, like you're sitting and watching them on a small stage. But nonetheless, just such beautiful music. Highly recommend this record. This album is from 1978. This is called Triple Concerto by Donald Martino. And Donald Martino, aside from being a composer, was a concert clarinetist. And his goal for writing this was he has soprano, bass, and contrabass clarinets. That's why it's a triple concerto. And really, unlike other concertos where you would have sort of a dialogue between the two instruments and the orchestra, this one, his goal was to take all three of those types of clarinets and span them across 6 octaves to get what he called a super clarinet. So it's really more lines being played and handed off from different instruments, and then the contrabass clarinet just can go so deep. And this in itself is really like an audiophile stunning recording, like one of the greatest sounding chamber works I've heard. The percussion is incredible. The strings are incredible. There's like some glockenspiel in there and some marimbas and maybe a celesta. I know there's piano in there. Just a really beautiful, beautiful experimental avant-garde recording. If you're not a fan of avant-garde composition, you probably will not like this. If you are a fan of it, you probably will really love this. It never really gets into the tone row sort of annoying avant-garde stuff. It doesn't always remain necessarily tonally centered, but it doesn't go too far out either. And it's rhythmically super interesting and challenging. And just to hear the 3 clarinets playing is beautiful. Highly recommend this record as well. The next record on the list is the most recent of all of the Nonesuch recordings. This is from 2019. This is Johnny Greenwood's soundtrack to the film There Will Be Blood. If you haven't seen There Will Be Blood, go out and watch it immediately. Daniel Day-Lewis, incredible film. And this soundtrack is not your typical lush strings, melodramatic music. It really fits the anxiety and the tension and the violence of this film. And it really just amplifies the general unease of the whole thing. And these are all compositions written by Johnny Greenwood. It features the London Sinfonietta recorded at Abbey Road. And Johnny plays mostly the Ondes Martenot, which is like one of the very first earliest synthesizers that has a keyboard and it also has the pulley finger string that goes back and forth to slide and the glissando. This also has sparing percussion, really dynamic percussion, prepared piano. A good amount of it is also quartet music, and these quartets are just fantastic. They remind me a lot of the later Shostakovich quartets. They're very tight, grinding, close harmonically, seconds and ninths and stuff, and very dramatic, avant-garde, just clusters. And the rhythm is like really, really jagged and interesting. It almost reminds me of like if Autechre wrote string quartets. Really, really interesting music. Highly recommend the film and the record. It's just a really, really beautifully dark record. Okay, this next record is Kawali, Sufi music from Pakistan, featuring the Sabri brothers and ensemble. This is such a beautiful, wonderful record. The singing is just incredible. The harmonies, mind-blowing. This is one of the first records to really bring Sufi music to the West, and I think it actually sold pretty well in its day. And the instrumentation is very minimal. It has a harmonium and a tambura and a bunch of percussion and just singing, group singing, harmonies on top. Some of it is almost like a spiritual chanting. It's just hypnotic, beautiful, soaring. This again recorded by David Lewiston, but instead of him traveling to their country and making more of a field recording, this one's actually recorded in the US while they were on a tour. So the sound is superb. And I love listening to this in the morning when I wake up and I have my tea and I put this on, and it's just such a beautiful way to start the day. Next, this is the soundtrack to the movie Mishima by Philip Glass from 1985. I mean, there was no way I could leave this off. I love Paul Schrader, the director, who also directed Barfly. I have been reading the novels, short stories of Yukio Mishima since high school. I think I've read everything he's ever written. I love him as an artist, as a person. Incredible human being. Sometimes I still put on Mishima audiobooks at nighttime to go to sleep to, and listen to it all night long. This really is a good representation of Philip Glass's earlier period scoring work. And the movie itself is really called Mishima, A Life in Three Parts, I believe. Pieces, I think it's parts. And so there are black and white sections that are from his childhood, and for those scenes he uses quartet music played by the Kronos Quartet. Then there's his writing, which mostly revolves around a large orchestra. And then there's also the scenes of his current day life and the last day of his life. And if you know anything about Mishima, you know how that ended, and the movie sort of follows that whole day. And so there's an interweaving of these three parts coming together, and he uses the different formats to tie them all together. And then all through it, you have sort of the typical Philip Glass organ and synthesizer, ostinati, arpeggios, moving and churning and propelling everything along. And this one, I mean, I love also Koyaanisqatsi, those soundtracks too, but there's something about this one that has that surreal, dreamlike synthesizer, propulsive stuff going on, but then interwoven intermittently with string quartets and the large orchestra. It's just so brilliant how it just carries the whole film along. And another really great thing about Philip Glass's soundtracks is that they stand alone really well as a record. Like if you put this album on, the first track to the last track has an arc and it makes sense. It's not so much like a modern day soundtrack where it's just like a little clips of vignettes that don't really make sense going one to another. They're just little sound samples, where this is really one well thought out, orchestrated, symphonic work from beginning to end, and it's just a fantastic listen. Next up, truly one of the most inspiring to me and one of my favorite pieces of music ever written. This is Heinrich Gorecki's Symphony No. 3, the Symphony of Sorrowful Songs. This release is from 1992, and I believe this was the most popular Nonesuch record ever. I think it sold over 1 million copies. I think there was something just in the zeitgeist and the era of everything lining up for this recording to hit at the perfect time. And I remember I was first exposed to it. It was part of the soundtrack to Julian Schnabel's film Basquiat. And I remember this piece of music coming in at a really dark period in the movie. And this symphony is probably one of the heaviest, most depressing pieces of music ever written. It's one soprano soloist singing over a large string orchestra. The text of it's based off of 15th century Polish lament titled Virgin Mary at the Cross. The whole work in itself is said to be a representation of maternal love, and I hear a lot of just suffering and loss and regret and longing. It's just such a beautiful, heavy piece of music. It's not something that you really put on all the time or put on for fun or anything like that, but when you're in that mood and you need that feeling, this album just feels so perfect. The soloist on this one is Dawn Upshaw. She just has the most beautiful, angelic voice you could ever hear. I have another version of it done by Beth Gibbons, which is also great, but I mean, she just really doesn't possess the vocal ability that Dawn Upshaw does. Still a really nice listen though. And this album, in a way, really, to me, is the height, along with Arvo Pärt's Tabula Rasa, of just sort of that minimal spiritualism movement, or whatever you want to call it. And just like with Pärt's music, it has a religious spirituality, a deep longing, and a faith in humanity that I think is missing from so much music of this period, and obviously current music. But if you're not familiar with Heinrich Gorecki or Arvo Pärt for that matter, do yourself a favor and go out and listen to all of their works. They're all incredible. And last up is the score to The Hours, again composed by Philip Glass. I kind of didn't want to put two Philip Glass albums in here, but I didn't know which one to leave off, The Hours or Mishima, because they're both brilliant, and they're brilliant in two completely different ways. This is much later and a more mature compositional style from Glass. So this is the soundtrack to the 2002 film, and a lot like Mishima, it's really written in kind of a triptych, like three different storylines are interwoven together, and the thing that's the like emotional glue to those three vignettes working is Philip Glass's music. He doesn't use any different instrumentation. Again, it's like a non-leitmotif thing. There's not a certain orchestration or theme that happens when this character is on the screen or anything. It's an overarching body of work, and just like Mishima stands alone brilliantly if you've never heard of the movie or anything. Just an incredible album. And this one is more of a slow churning. I would say there's no big climaxes in this that often exist in scores. It's mostly just a bunch of slow building surges that go up and come back down and go up and come down. And the piano plays throughout of it. And I think the piano is like the emotional temperature narrator of all of the different pieces. And like a lot of Glass's work, it is heavy on the ostinati and the arpeggios and stuff like that. And oftentimes it's done on the piano, and although it holds two key very well, a lot of times it slides between minor keys and being like really modal. So he'll drop a 4, he'll sharp a 5 or something to bring the mood down to a more sorrowful feeling, or elevate it into something more anxious or tense. And really this starts right from the beginning of the record. It comes out, the first piece is in D minor, and it's got this like low pedal D and then an A, so it's like a 1-5. The A dyad keeps coming in and out and just builds this foundation of this low drone in the cello that lets the piano move across it and become more modal and push and pull, but there's always kind of that pedal at the bottom. And a lot of the pieces have the same format. There's definitely a foundation that gets laid and a middle layer of textured string orchestration, and then the piano really does all the talking on the top. And some of the pieces get bigger in an orchestrated sense, and some of them are just solo piano and everything in between, and it's just such an exquisitely, beautifully well composed and played record. I listen to this all the time. My one downfall I would say with this was I wished it was pressed on better vinyl or just sounded a little bit better. Originally it only came out on CD, and this reissue that came out was the first vinyl pressing, And I wish they would have, you know, had like Kevin Gray master it and do it at RTI or something and do like a real audiophile remaster of this and pressing. But it's just kind of on a standard pressing, which I think doesn't by any means make it bad, nor is it a bad pressing. I just feel like it could be better. But overall, if you've never heard this, just stream it, whatever, you know, put it on, listen to it. It's an incredible, heartfelt, beautiful musical journey, one of my favorite pieces of music ever. And that's it. I mean, I could have gone on and on about each record, but I just wanted to give a little snippet of an overview of my personal 10 favorite records from Nonesuch. And like I was saying in the beginning, you know, I could have just done 10 modern records. I could have done 10 soundtracks. I could have done 15 from the Explorer series. You know, there's like Gagaku records. I have that full collection. There's a ton of Indian classical, so much beautiful African music and singing and chanting. The world of Nonesuch is big, and that's why it reminds me of ECM in a way. It has a sprawling reach, and it's not just one thing, you know? And it does have iconic releases, and it has very, very underground, rarely listened to releases, which also are beautiful. And in the avant-garde series, a lot of times it'll be 2 or 3 composers, and sometimes there's one piece on there that's just so amazingly brilliant, and like the next piece will just be super annoying and I hate it. But that's what you get in compilations, and so you really need to just listen to all of them from beginning to end and pick them out. And there's incredible percussion albums too in that series with like just straight percussion ensembles. There's Varese pieces, there's ionization and integrales, and there's other more kind of world ethnic percussion albums in that series. And most of them really have a heightened, really, really nice audiophile recording and pressing going on with them. Again, you know, everything done by Robert Ludwig. Like that Mishima record I showed, I didn't say it, but it's also on clarity vinyl, you know, the kind you hold up to the light and you can see through that it's brown. And little touches like that on some of the records really amp up the quality of them. And the good news is most of them still are not very expensive. Like you could still go out, find most of these records in some deep, dark corner of any record store where no one ever goes into, and you'll find 1 or 2 of those Nonesuch records hiding in there. A lot like the ECMs, they're generally in good condition. I think the people who were purchasing this repertoire probably understood how to take care of records. And so I just highly encourage everyone to go out, start picking them up when you see them. Bring them home, listen to them. If you don't like it, if it's too much for you, well, whatever. It was $5, $10 anyway. They're inexpensive. And the more you get, the more you'll start to see the overarching theme of the label. And just one of my most favorite labels ever. I think the album artwork from the Avant-Garde series is the most iconic series of records ever made. And I love Nonesuch. I have so many of their albums. I've been listening to them for 25 years or so. I used to go to Amoeba, and actually I would dig them out of the dollar section when the classical section at Amoeba was like one whole half of a room, and you could just pick them up for $1. So that's it. That's about all I have to say. Thank you for watching this. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.